Let's talk about your playing style and more specifically how you use your right hand. This comes up in a lot of interviews for you, of course,
Yeah.
because it's obviously something more unique to you. How did that develop for you?
Well, it's a funny story because um, I developed this technique from the start. I started playing when I was 10 years old, and my father was always playing classical guitar at home. And I just thought that every guitar was meant to be played with fingers. I didn't know that you should use a pick for the electric and fingers with classical. So I just started with this bass-like technique, just because it was comfortable to me. And then, of course, I discovered about the pick, but I was too lazy to restart the game. So I just kept playing with fingers, and I began to be used to it. And that was, of course, thanks to also classical guitar. It helped me a lot to achieve the technique I have now. And of course, I borrowed a lot of aspects of my technique from the classical world. And I should say, a lot of people say that I invented this technique, but it's not really true. I didn't really invent this kind of style. It's just rare to see fingerstyle with electric guitar, but I'm not the only one that does it. I mean, it's a mix of bass technique and some classical elements, of course. In order to achieve the technique I have now, I really had to study a lot, especially in the first years.
Now, did your father or any other teacher try to try to get you to change that or adjust that, or did they realize that it was just your thing and let you just run with it?
I don't really remember somebody that corrected me, so I think they just let the thing going on. But in there are for sure some things that I figure out over the years to let's say perfect my technique, because I was always playing with fingers, but my fingerstyle technique is not the same when I was starting. Of course, there are some elements that I perfected all over the years, and that was also because I really had the chance to have very good teachers. Like my father was the first one, of course. Then I had a classical guitar teacher that is called Damiano Busanto, and he was my high school classical teacher. Yeah, and he was a very patient guy because, as I said before, I wasn't really into classical guitar back then, but he was patient enough to let me get into it slowly. And then I had Paolo Sorge as my jazz guitar teacher at the conservatory. But every one of them gave me a lot of useful stuff to grow up. And I think I got very lucky because if you have the wrong teacher, sometimes can be damaging even your passion. There are some people that if they encounter the wrong teacher, they just give up sometimes. So I consider myself extremely lucky because I got the chance, especially in the classical world, because I was really lazy guy. I didn't want to read. And the thing I was doing, especially the first years of classical guitar, is that I was watching the video on YouTube and I was figuring out everything by ear. And I was not using the score because I didn't want to read. And that was because I was much faster with the ears rather than reading on the score page. But then I began to read a little bit. I don't consider myself a good sight reader even now, but thanks to Damiano Busaldo, I now at least know where the notes are, let's say.
That's funny. So you mentioned American influences in music. Who were the guitarists whom you were looking up to as you were listening and learning?
Well, I should say the first big influence was not American, actually. Jimi Hendrix was the first big influence. And oh, sorry. I should say AC/DC was the first big influence, and they're Australian. Um, and it was the first band I really got into it. Then, of course, Hendrix, uh, a lot of tunes from Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, uh, of course, Rolling Stones. And so the first tunes I learned were pretty much from these bands. So I started as a rock and roll guy. And then, of course, I switched to a lot of different things. I began to be interested to jazz fusion stuff, like Mahavishnu Orchestra, Weather Report, a lot of things from Chick Corea, for example, and also a lot of guitarists from the 80s, like Paul Gilbert, Ingrid Malmsteen, for example, for a long time, Steve Vai. Before all of this was Eddie Van Halen was, let's say, my first introduction to spread play.
Yeah, I think everybody remembers where they were the first time they heard Eruption.
Yeah, it was life-changing event.
Yes. Is there a band you currently listen to which people would be surprised to learn your interest in?
Well, not necessarily surprised. I'm a big fan of Toto, for example, because Steve Lukather is one of my favorite players for sure. But it's mostly guitar-oriented music. Maybe a little bit surprising would be the Beach Boys, for example. One of my favorite albums is Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. Simply because it was one of the albums my father had in the car. And back when we were traveling a lot by car, he was always putting on this album. And I know all the tunes.
The harmonies on that album, their ability to harmonize on that album is incredible. I think I think people waver back and forth debating whether Sgt. Pepper's or Pet Sounds is the best. There's this whole argument as to which one is the best one ever made, arguably. So,
well, harmonically speaking, Pet Sounds a little bit more advanced. It's almost like classical music in some ways. You analyze God Only Knows, for example, it's a masterpiece of harmony and melody. And even I don't remember the name, but there's an instrumental tune on that album. It's beautiful. And it's an orchestral piece. There are no words or lyrics to it. And it's amazing how they came up with this stuff back on those days. It sounds like an album made almost like 30 or 40 years later.
So you've been writing, recording, playing music for years, having stuff on YouTube for years. Do you sense certain meanings in certain sounds? And if so, what does that kind of mean to your music? I mean, to be able to have the power to like change people's moods, feelings, make them happy or sad or any number of things. I mean, what does that ability kind of, I guess, mean to you?
Well, it means a lot, of course. You have this power that you need to be able to incorporate into your own playing. And let's say it doesn't always happen to give emotion to people. If you're not emotion yourself with guitar, so you need to be able to first of all emotion yourself just with playing with yourself first, I think, in order to give the best to your audience, I think. And that's the same thing that said Santana, I think, in an interview. You need to give choose to yourself first in order to be able to play convincingly with other people, in order to give the same emotion you are sensing, you need to be able to sense and view first. And sometimes it can happen if you study a lot with your instrument to lose focus on this. Like you need to be able to, first of all, like what you are playing in order to give this kind of emotions. And sometimes it doesn't happen. There are some days I have to be honest, there are some days that I feel disconnected to the instrument. And there are some other days where I really give choose to myself every time I play. I still cannot command that. There are some days that I'm able to do it. There are some other days that it just doesn't happen.
It's just
so, yeah, it's just not there. And you cannot have a switch on this area, You can work on the technique. I mean, you can work on everything. If you put the hours, you can get there, of course. But this kind of emotional side of things, it's more connected to the way you feel in that moment. and you cannot command this. Well, if you feel happy or you feel like really into the song, it just happens. There are some gigs where I really feel very connected to the music, and gigs when I really I'm not there. I'm just playing.
Just kind of going
Nice.
through the motions.
Yeah. So I still have to figure out a way to be more, let's say, have more control with this.